How you doing? Before we start today's class, I want to inform you that if you are a child under the age of 18 and you choose to watch this video, I am not liable or responsible for any decisions that you make in your future. Because who I am is not important, but what I have to say is important. So, let's review. You see, last week we covered physical health, and we talked all about the various things that you could do to make your body healthy and the various methods that you can utilize to make you as strong as possible to stay living as long as possible. And at the beginning of last week's class, I had to specifically discuss male and female because of some confusion that may be going on in today's day and age, so I just wanted to clear that up. And I will reiterate what I said last week by saying that males are humans with testicles and penises that produce sperm, and females have a vagina which produce eggs, and they also have breasts which produce breast milk. Now, these are the natural biologies and classifications of these human individuals, even though in today's day and age, some people may get that confused with the definitions of masculinity and femininity, which are indeed different from male and female. You see, the definitions of masculinity and femininity is that masculinity and femininity are the perceptions of what you believe a male or a female to be like, whereas male and female is the biological terms and the classifications of who you are as an individual. What's between your legs determines how you function. And I know there's also the certain rare case that some individuals may be born with both sexual organs. However, they are still identified and classified with one specific sex because they only have one functioning sexual organ. Out of those two sexual organs, only one truly functions. If there was a case to where both functions, then that would be a completely different story. But unfortunately, that is not a case that has been identified, and it is not seeming to be a case that will be identified in the future unless we, like I said, advance in stem cells. So, why is it important for today's lesson? Well, it's because today's lesson we are exclusively talking about sexual education, as I wanted to make this its own lesson exclusive from physical health because there is a lot to discuss, specifically about reproduction, which reproduction is the main topic when it comes to sexual education. Now, I will not be discussing the lewd conversation when it comes to sex. I will only be discussing reproduction and sexual preference in today's day and age, because there is a lot to discuss there, specifically with how viewpoints are made and various other things are formulated. Now, before we can get to that, we need to first find out about reproduction. Specifically, what is reproduction, why do we human beings do it, and what is the purpose of it? Let's start with reproduction and its definition. Reproduction is the process of sex in and of itself, specifically when the sperm gets fertilized inside of the egg, and the egg formulates into a completely new organism known as a baby, and once the baby is born, it is a completely new life. Now, why do we as human beings do this? Why do we as human beings have sex? Now, the purpose of reproduction is to create more of our species to make sure that we don't go extinct. Now, in today's day and age, there's so many people in the world that this is not really a major concern. However, if there ever was a major disaster or a natural disaster that kills off most of the population, reproduction is the key to recreating humanity. It is not mandatory to have a baby. However, anyone is capable of doing so when a male and a female come together to have sex and have a baby. However, some individuals may have the incapability of reproducing, mainly due to health complications with their sexual organs in question. However, if the sexual process is successful, the individuals will create a baby. Now, to determine if the baby turns out to be a boy or a girl, it's mainly down to the sexual chromosomes of the individual. You see, when the baby is a female, the baby will have XX chromosomes, which will determine that they are indeed female, and a boy will have XY chromosomes, which will determine that they're a boy, because every cell in the body has these chromosomes and determines the sexual reproductive organs that they will be born with. It is essentially like a DNA coding that creates and formulates the sexual organ in the womb. It is also, in today's day and age, physically impossible to change those sexual organs, because in order to change those sexual organs, you would need to change the DNA coding from XY to XX or vice versa, and that is essentially impossible in today's science. However, it may be possible in the future, but it's just not possible as of right now. I know there's a lot of first-time trials in regards to gender-affirming care in today's day and age. However, those treatments are mainly unsuccessful due to the fact that we literally cannot change on a physical level the penis into a vagina and a vagina into a penis. We do not have the science nor the technology to be able to do that. So I just want to make that absolutely clear for anybody who may have viewpoints in regards to those specific topics, because you are not in the wrong for wanting to believe that one day we might be able to do that. It's just that we cannot physically do that in today's day and age. In fact, physically we are incapable of doing a lot of things. It is kind of like the one reality that keeps us in check is our physical bodies, because if we didn't have our physical bodies, we would essentially be able to do whatever we want, whenever we wanted, because we are completely free. However, our physical bodies is our limitation that prevents us from dying, that prevents us from doing something that may cause mayhem and chaos in terms of what may harm you or may harm others. Now, that viewpoint can vary, but I'll go more into that in future classes. Identity in general is something that I want to cover in full context with other discussions regarding mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, and all those other social healths as well. So anything regarding identity, I will cover in those videos specifically. Now, I do want to mention the reason as to why we as humans have the instinctive desire to want to have babies in the first place. Now, we have the instinctive desire to want to have babies because as we grow older and as our bodies age, we get a development of hormonal dopamine that essentially gives us the high and the desire to want to indulge in sexual activity. However, if you're somebody who simply just wants to indulge in sexual activity and doesn't want to risk reproducing when it's on a male and female sexual basis, I suggest that you either wear a condom, wear a tampon, take birth control pills, or just avoid the concept of sexual intercourse in general. Albeit if you really do want to do it, then there's other sexual methods that you can utilize to avoid that fate. Now, when it comes to individuals who cannot have a child, or perhaps want a child, but the reason that they can't have a child is because of their sexual preference, you always have the ability to adopt a child. You always have the capability of getting a child from an orphanage, and specifically other methods like that. There's a lot of paperwork that's involved with that. There's a lot of things that need to be, required of you on a psychological level that's also required for that to see if you're capable of being a parent. And child support in and of itself is a concept that we created to ensure that parents are responsible for their children at all costs. That's why it costs money to afford your child, even though it may seem unreasonable or very crazy. The reason why we have the child support and to begin with is to make sure that parents are responsible for their children. Now, this in question may cause some controversy and problems in and of itself, mainly due to the fact that child support is mostly a one-sided deal when it comes to who's more responsible of a parent. If there ever was a divorce in a relationship, most oftentimes or not, the parent that is likely to be chosen is the female, because the mother is the one that birthed the child. However, if the mother has been proven to be way too out of line to take care of a child, in the cases that would swing over to the father. Now, to indulge in the topic of discussion, sexual preference. When it comes to sexual preference, there's only 3 sexual preferences that one can have. There's heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual. Every other concept of sexuality is just a derivative of these 3 sexual preferences right here. When it comes to asexuality, that's just not a correct term or usage of the word asexual, because asexual implies the reproduction of a single organism having a baby, which is essentially like a clone of that organism, because if you're only using the same DNA, then you would make the same organism. That is how the process of asexuality actually works. For those who identify with asexuality, the real preference that they are actually identifying with is just not having sex in general, not indulging in sexual conduct at all. And asexuality is a wrong term, so I just wanted to clear that up. Now, when it comes to these 3 sexual preferences, there is a lot to discuss. Mainly one big myth that I want to clear right off the bat, and that myth is that one can be born with a specific sexual preference. That is physically impossible. You see, your mind is not physically capable of constructing the concept of sex in the womb. In fact, a baby would never even know the concept of sex to begin with. There's no possible way. Even if they get the instinctive to have reproductive desire, they have no idea what sex is, because when you're a baby, you don't even know anything. You are absorbing information in order to gain access to your mind, in order to understand things and learn things and be able to utilize things around you. That's like saying, for example, if I was to strip away your entire conscious mind right now, would you know what sexual preference you have? No, because you don't remember anything. I just stripped it away from you. This is actually a great discussion that I love to go into in the mentality health video. But essentially the point still stands that if you are born, regardless as a male or a female, you are not automatically designated to one specific sexual preference. In fact, if you are designated to a sexual preference at a young age, it's mainly due to influence, and that involves the people around you and the things that you conduct and perceive at such a young age. Oftentimes or not, this is why parents don't teach sexual intercourse around children or allow the conversation of sexual intercourse around children, because they are at a young age where their hormones haven't developed yet, and they wouldn't really know what sexual preference is and how to indulge in it. And due to that fact, it has also become a big law in regards to children in topic and conversation of sexual intercourse, because since children are incapable of perceiving sexual intercourse before their hormonal growth, then it is essentially taking advantage of the child when they are completely clueless and helpless. That's why the social construct known as Pride Month, which specifically this month, June, is a major conversation for controversy, because when children are involved in the same discussion as sexual intercourse, it becomes a huge problem, especially when you have children walking around the streets with a bunch of naked people doing a bunch of sexual dances. It is also why I had to personally leave a disclaimer at the beginning of this video, because the conversation of sexual intercourse is accessible to anybody, including children. And that's why parents need to be able to monitor their children as great as they can if they truly want to avoid their child even indulging in that conversation, or avoid getting arrested, because that's a thing too. This, of course, leads to the conversation of sexual preference in general, because for many years, thousands of years, sexual preference has been limited to specifically heterosexuality, because heterosexuality allows for a man and female to reproduce and have a baby. But of course, in modern times, with a large population, with little to no worldwide threats that would cause a massive decline of the population, this of course allowed the door to open to further explore the other sexual preference, that is homosexuality. Now, homosexuality is, as the namesake says it is, and that you are sexually attracted to the same sex. For many years, this concept and construct was forbidden, mainly due to a lot of religious beliefs and spiritual health, which I will cover all in that video specifically. But now it's more so allowed and acceptable in today's day and age. Now you see, due to many years of homosexuality being unacceptable, it's essentially affected the mindset of people who've indulged in homosexuality over the years, specifically because of society as a whole, which I do want to very much talk about in the social health video, which I know I'm advertising a lot for the future classes, but that's essentially how teaching works. We build up the lessons over time here. Now, this is something that tends to happen in society when there's been a specific direction of things for a very long time. It's happened before with race and with sex, but the difference between race and sex is that race and sex is objective, whereas sexual preference is something subjective and it's a choice, an opinion, which allowed for the subjective nature of it to be judged a lot more than something like race or sex, because it is a choice to indulge in sexual preference, whereas when it comes to race or sex, that's just genetics, basics. So how does this affect someone who may perhaps indulge in a sexual preference that is opposite to your own? Well, specifically, it's affected behavior of individuals in particular. The behavior of one individual may be completely childish or completely opposing to what they actually seem to be. Specifically, in today's day and age, a great example would be a male who perhaps is a homosexual or prefers the homosexuality preference, but because it has been something so forbidden and has been probably maybe perhaps enforced onto that individual may believe that they perhaps don't even identify with the terms of masculinity and femininity, which brings back to my point of earlier when I discussed the definitions, because that individual may then eventually believe that the concept of their masculinity doesn't match what they are and what they identify as, and that leads them down the road to believing that they must be the opposite sex in return. This, of course, leads into the grand identity crisis known as gender dysphoria, which, like I said multiple times throughout this video, I will cover this topic all in all in different videos later on in time. But in actuality, that man just prefers the homosexual preference. But this is what I mean when behavior is affected by mentality. So that will wrap up today's discussion in regards to sexual preference. A quick little review. Let's review really quickly. There is male and female sexes, which is different from the definitions of masculinity and femininity, which are social constructs. A male has a penis and testicles, and they also have XY chromosomes, whereas a female has vagina and breasts, and they have XX chromosomes, and each of their functions are utilized to craft a baby. Men have sperms and females have eggs. The breast milk, which I almost forgot to discuss, breast milk is utilized to give a baby its nutrients when it is incapable of consuming a lot heavier foods and a lot heavier drinks. And of course, when it comes to having a baby, a male and a female have sex together, and when they have sex together, they create a baby if there is no restrictions in regards to that or health complications. However, when it comes to sexual preference in general, you can make whatever decisions or choice and preference that you want because you're capable of doing so, whether it be heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality, or it could be with whomever you want it to be with. But of course, this is all comes down to social constructs and concepts, which I'm going to cover in next week's class. So that will wrap up today's video, and I will see you next week in class.